Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Whatcha Gonna Queue. We are back from our week-long hiatus, and depending on what studies you read, we are either better than before or just as good as before, but certainly not bad.
Not worse.
For those of you who may have forgotten what we were all about while we were gone, Whatcha Gonna Queue is a weekly video series in which we highlight some of the best titles that Netflix has to offer, with our recommendations broken down into 3 categories. Instant Karma, where we recommend some of the best instant titles to watch before they expire. What the F is This, where we highlight some of the obscure or overlooked titles buried in the annals of Netflix. And For Your Consideration, where the recommended titles tie into a timely, predetermined cinematic theme. And as always, I'm one of your co-hosts, Jim Roner.
And I'm your other co-host, Alex Rabinowitz.
Alex, how was your vacation? Are you fully rested?
I am. It was lovely.
Yeah, and did you bring me anything back?
I did.
Yeah, what is it?
Did.
Okay.
Hold on. A recommendation in section 1.
Oh.
South African newcomer Neil Blomkamp transports you to an alternative world Johannesburg, where inhabitants are not segregated by the color of their skin, but by their interplanetary species. District 9 is a verite-style alien allegory starring Sharlto Copley, Jason Cope, and David James.
How do your weapons work?
District 9 caught a lot of people off guard in the summer of 2009 by becoming a sleeper hit. Originally, producer Peter Jackson from Lord of the Rings and Neil Blomkamp, this newcomer South African director, were setting out to make a big screen version of Halo. But because of lack of financing, they decided to make Blomkamp's short, Alive in Joburg, a feature instead, and it became District 9. They shot it on a very, very small budget, $30 million, on location in South Africa. And surprise, due to some really good viral marketing, it became this big hit.
Yeah, and it's funny to think about the low budget because it looks so much more expensive than its $30 million budget. And certainly, not only did it get audiences' attention with the box office success, but it also got critical attention because it got nominated for a few Academy Awards, including in the first year of 10 Best Picture nominees, it got nominated for Best Picture in 2010.
Yeah, and I think why that is because it's such a bold original movie. It wasn't based on a comic book or a TV show or a reboot of an old film. It's an original idea from Neil Blomkamp, and it's a really genius one in that it does what the great science fiction films do, is comment on society and use that social allegory.
There's a lot of secrets in District 9.
And this, what it does is it trades the real apartheid in South Africa for a figurative one with, instead of race tension, it's species tension with these overgrown shrimp-like aliens and humans, and the aliens are the ones that are living in the ghetto.
Yeah, and once again, credit Neil Blomkamp, especially as a first-time director, because he really makes both levels of this film work, because like you said, it works great as a social and political allegory, but it's not preachy either, because it also works on a level of just being a really solid, just popcorn action flick, too.
Yeah, it's very well paced. There's a lot of great action as you go through the pacing of the film. It was written with as much gusto as a Spielberg film or a J.J. Abrams film or Lucas, and there's just some like really chilling special effects and makeup that just kind of like gross you out. It fires on all cylinders.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you, Alex. But what I want to know now, when does it expire on Instant?
It's expiring May 5th.
Well, it's kind of eerie, Alex, that you're going to be recommending a movie about aliens from a first-time filmmaker, because that's what I'm going to be recommending, and what the bleep is this? They may be aliens, but in this film, they're called monsters. 6 years after a NASA space probe crashes in Central America, bringing with it the emergence of new alien life, a photojournalist, played by Scoot McNairy, is tasked with escorting his boss's daughter, played by Whitney Able, through the quarantine zone of Mexico to the safety of the U.S. border. Shot digitally on a shoestring budget with a largely improvised script, Monsters was written and directed by newcomer Gareth Edwards, who also filled the role of cinematographer, production designer, and visual effects artist. Like Neil Blomkamp, Gareth Edwards' story is an inspirational one. He had been doing visual effects for a lot of years, really wanted to make a film, but recognized nobody was going to just hand him the opportunity. So what he did was he came up with just a premise, where the monster movie ends and then life, begins afterwards. That was the concept he really wanted to explore. So he pitched that to Vertigo Films. Vertigo Films said, great, go with it. And then he found himself in the unfortunate position of then, without really having a script, trying to base a premise around that concept and, rush and get things done.
Yeah. So you say it's largely largely improvisational. He didn't have a script. So I'm assuming they were just winging it out there.
Yes and no, because while everything wasn't written out exactly, how Gareth and the actors would approach a scene was to have it broken down into two different ideas, written on two different color-coded pieces of paper. So on one piece of paper, he would have everything that would physically transpire in a scene. And on the other piece of paper, he would have everything that would emotionally transpire in a scene. And then based on that, he would just kind of let the actors go and play with it as they will. But where the fun improvisation elements come in is that everybody else on screen besides the two actors are just locals that they hired 5 minutes before they shot the scene. Hey you, do you want to be in a monster movie? Here's what happens.
Very difficult journey, very risky, very dangerous. You have the money, you take the risk.
So they were winging it. But you talk about the dichotomy with emotions and physicality. And I think viewers are really going to be surprised at the amount of emotion that is in this monster movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Because while there's aliens certainly in the film, they're peripheral. You know, they're just there to kind of set up the environment. What's really the focal point of this film is the emotional connection between Scoot and Whitney's characters. You know, it's their journey. We're following them. We're getting emotionally involved with them. And the chemistry that you see on screen was not manufactured, because they actually, during the shooting, ended up falling in love with each other and then getting married afterwards. So I think that it really comes forward and I think adds another level of enjoyment to the film.
Yeah.
So, and speaking of being in love, if the man that we're about to talk about in Section 3 were still alive, I think it's safe to say that I would have a huge man crush on him. Much to Alex's chagrin, I've never made my love for Billy Wilder a secret. If my math is correct, and it may not be, the Austrian-born filmmaker has already featured into roughly 10% of our Whatcha Gonna Queue episodes, and after this episode, that percentage will increase slightly. On March 27th, it will be 9 years since Billy Wilder's death, and to honor the man who won more Oscars than Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg, John Ford, or either of the Coens, we are dedicating for your consideration to the films of the man who once said of Marilyn Monroe that she had, quote, breasts like granite and a brain like Swiss cheese.
From the unconventional opening narrated by the film's already deceased protagonist, Sunset Boulevard declares itself as a no-holds-barred look at the unforgiving Hollywood studio system. Starring William Holden as hack screenwriter Joe Gillis and Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond, the washed-up silent film star who employs him, Sunset Boulevard is an unflinching look at the highs and lows of celebrity culture and the victims caught in its wake.
There may be some girl that I'm crazy about.
Who? Some car hop or a dress extra?
Of all of Billy Wilder's films, I think Sunset Boulevard might be his most well-known and highest regarded. At the time of its release, it won 3 Oscars and was nominated for 8 more. It is currently at number 32 on IMDb's top 250 list, and even more impressively, number 12 on AFI's top 100 films of all time. It's just one of those classic movies that's in the cultural lexicon, thanks largely to its famous line, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille."
And when it won all those Oscars, you know, Billy Wilder wasn't a stranger to winning Oscar Gold. He had, you know, previously won for The Lost Weekend and been nominated for Double Indemnity before that. But what Sunset Boulevard did better than any of the films that came before it, like you said, was kind of boldly declared Billy Wilder as, you know, this important filmmaker who had these, you know, bold opinions and just didn't care who knew about it, especially the studios that were paying the money for him to make them.
Right, he's doing what he does best here, which is give that insider view with an outsider's perspective. And it really brings a unique image of Hollywood, and particularly the value of the people working in the system. He's doing some great meta-commentary with those that had to deal with the transition from silent to sound, particularly Erich von Stroheim, who was a silent director who plays Norma Desmond's butler in the film, and there's a great scene that features some cameos from silent film actors like Buster Keaton and H.D. Warner.
What's this all about?
Why don't you come out and see for yourself?
Yeah, it's really great, and it's also really heartbreaking to see the downward spiral that Norma Desmond finds herself in, culminated, of course, in that final scene where she finally reveals, you know, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille," which most people would say is the most powerful and memorable scene in the film.
Right.
I would actually disagree and say that the most memorable and powerful scene in the film was one where she, you know, finally gets out of her seclusion in her house, goes to the studio to meet Cecil B. DeMille, and it's the culmination of this thesis that you're talking about with Wilder's just scathing indictment of Hollywood.
Yeah, it's really tragic. She thinks that she's being called in to get her next big job, her triumphant return, and instead they just want to use her car. And the only person on set that recognizes her is some old crew member who shines a spotlight on her. A little on the nose for me, but definitely saying what is trying to be said in this film.
I would certainly agree with you, and inarguably just unforgettable, absolutely. But surprisingly, I'm going to turn the tables on you a little bit, and I'm going to be the one to recommend a little bit more lighthearted affair with my recommendation. 123 is a political comedy that takes place in Berlin, where Coca-Cola's head of West German operations, played by James Cagney, serves as a host for his American boss's daughter, who just so happens to have been recently married to a staunch East German communist. Immensely funny with rapid-fire comedic timing, 123 also carries plenty of Wilder's healthy cynicism about America's influence in capitalism and foreign political affairs.
He could use a haircut, and I'd like to give it to him myself with a hammer and sickle.
Alex, once again, Billy Wilder, the social critic.
Of course.
He returns to the home from whence he emigrated to kind of examine the influence of his new home, for lack of a better term, on the restructuring and rebuilding of, the economy after World War II, obviously, and does it through the lens of one of the largest and most recognized corporate brands in all the world, Coca-Cola.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to take on American capitalism, what a better corporation to do it with than Coca-Cola.
Despite the undertones of cynicism, like I said, there's really no condemnation of one ideology over the other. Both sides of the philosophical coin, both capitalism and communism, come out looking fairly ridiculous thanks to the, humorous exploits of their figureheads, James Cagney's character on the capitalism side, and then this character of Otto on the communist side. But they come out looking ridiculous, endearingly so. There's this great scene near the end of the film where when Cagney's boss is finally going to show up, they take Otto and they have to dress him up and pretend like he's this gung-ho capitalist. So they dress him up in fancy clothes and they feed him a bunch of lines. It's funny and it's poignant because while he's saying these lines wrong and screwing everything up, it still kind of fits in with the ideology of capitalism, but also works in a deeper level in the sense of it's very indicative of just the messed up and kind of unstable culture that's going on in Berlin at the time.
How is the situation here in Berlin? It shouldn't happen to a dog. I mean, it's a draw. Actually, the situation is hopeless, but not serious.
Yeah, it's great that it's such a broad comedy. It's just really funny.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing to take away is that 123 is first and foremost a comedy, and it's really, really funny. It's one of the only movies I know of where the title is taken directly from its comedic pacing. I mean, 1, 2, 3. The jokes just kind of bombard you like one after the other. It's almost like an old Marx Brothers film where it never really gives you time to recover. So I think that's the most important thing to remember is that even though there's a little bit of a preachy message, there's also just a lot on the surface to enjoy as well.
Sounds hilarious.
It does, and I think people are going to need a comedy to get them through the hard times, and by hard times I mean the end of the episode. But thanks again for watching, guys. Once again, you can always reach us on our social media outlets. We have a Facebook page where you can post photos of your queue if you want some advice on what you should watch and what you shouldn't. We have a Twitter account where you can keep up to date on what we're doing all the time. We have a blog with some truly wonderful articles on what's going on in the world of Netflix, instant streaming, and just movie watching in general. And of course, you can always find our show on iTunes as well. So thanks again for watching, guys. Remember, until next time, top of the world, ma!